Welcome to the first episode of Season 2 of Security Insights Podcast. I'm Gunnar Peterson, CISO at Forder, the trust platform digital commerce. Join us at our Fraud Industry Impact Conference October 11th in New York City, which features e-commerce, fraud, and payments leaders from across the globe. Learn more at forder.com/impact. Super excited to kick off season 2, and we've got a great pair of guests in Diana Kelley and Ed Moyle. Welcome, Diana. Welcome, Ed.
Hey, Gunnar. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Well, you both have a new book out on security architecture, not just security architecture, but practical security architecture, which, as our listeners will learn, is a very important distinction. But before we dive into that for today's discussion, could you talk each about, and maybe Diana go first, a little bit about your career journey and how that led up to what you're doing now and your interest in security architecture and even writing a second edition of the book on it?
Yeah, so it's a lot, but the main starting point is I've always been in love with computers. When I was 9 years old, my dad brought home a Texas Instruments calculator. Everyone's going, she's go back to 9. I promise I'll condense it. But like that,
but they never told me there was math. They never told me there was math involved in security architecture. Now I know.
Now you know, but it was programmable. And I was like, wait, you can program this to do formulas and calculations. And that was it. I was hooked. And I taught myself how to program and just fell in love with computers. And then I finally went off to college and became an English major. And it's in part because what they were teaching at school wasn't really it was sort of old school mainframe. And I was really interested in distributed and what was going on in the DARPA that became the internet. But when I graduated, that great love just kept pulling me back. So every job I had in editorial, I was doing something with setting up the computers, managing the computers, getting the internet connected for email. And eventually at one of my jobs, I started doing the acquisitions of software. And the person who ran our network saw that. She was out in California because we were a sub in Boston. She said, look, you gotta do this. So it's been this absolute, it's me, it's who I am. I love to do this. And I pivoted from being basically a network person. So I got into my career. I was managing a startup in the Cambridge area, just outside of Boston. And I had 9 offices around the globe. I was super happy. We were distributing our software patches and updates through FTP, and someone got onto my network. And it was at that point that I went from being in love with networking, building strong networks and network architecture to caring about the security of it, because I was like, they got on my network, never again. I need
that to really gets your attention, right?
Yeah. So that was it. So then I pivoted to security and focused on security network architectures because I was really very much a network guy. And then I realized no matter what I did up to layer 3, no matter how good all of my systems and my right, you know where I'm going, it was the guys at layer 7, the Eds of the world, right? Because he started at layer 7 that were always getting onto my systems. So I realized I had to pivot and I had to become at least moderately intelligent about application security and secure application architectures and secure development life cycles. So my career has followed, going down those paths, going down those depths in technology, and I've practiced in a variety of different places. I've been a research analyst. I led security risk management strategy team at Burton Group, for example. As you know, as I was talking about, I led DataWare's technology and across the globe.
I'll raise a glass to Burton Group. I do miss them every week. I miss that trenchant analysis that you and your colleagues did at Burton Group. So well done.
I still remember you had one of the things that we published you were not happy with, and you said that we were off the reservation. I still remember that.
Oh, that doesn't sound like me at all.
We were all like, Gunnar doesn't like us. We felt that deeply. So I have worked for larger companies. So I was the executive security advisor at IBM, and I was also the Cybersecurity Field CTO at Microsoft for years. And now I am currently focused on AI and ML security. It became just as I sort of fell in love with the internet and programming and networks. I have gotten very deep into what AI and ML are for good and for bad. And part of that journey and that research led me to my current job where I'm the CISO at Protect AI.
Well, that sounds like more than plenty of topics to talk about on AI and ML security in a future discussion. But I do want to hear today about about your new book and also from your co-author Ed. Ed, do you also define your career bio in the OSI model layer stack? Is that how you frame your career trajectory?
Yeah, sure. I mean, she's right. I got started. I got interested in this. It was kind of almost like a two-step process, right? Step one was, when I was in high school, I this is kind of a geeky thing, I guess, but I used to find it really fun to, like, I would wait for the new game to come out, right? Like I was always waiting for the new game to come out, but I didn't really care about the game so much. I cared about the copy protection on the game, right? Because I would find it fun to, at the time it was like a program called Soft Ice by a company, Numega, that doesn't exist anymore. But I was really interested in, just what's going on under the hood. Like how does software work? Like how is it built? How is it constructed? I've just always kind of been that kind of person where I need to know how it works or else it bothers me, right? So I was interested in that. I did not, much like Diana, I did not study that in school. I studied theology and English, right? I was very interested in New Testament textual analysis. That was what I was going to do with my life. And I took a year off to earn money to go to graduate school. And during that year, I started to work for a biometric company that was developing basically like a single sign-on system using a new technology at the time, Java, which was, just nobody had ever heard of it. And I just was very interested in that and fell into doing that work and kind of worked my way through the ranks, as a developer working on security projects, doing development of cryptographic components and, building mostly in Java or in C, C++, object-oriented models for doing things like authentication services. And this was back before there was, web services. So, at the time we were building things that nowadays you'd call web services, but we didn't call it that at the time, right? So just the time came at one point in my career where I had to make a choice. Did I want to stay doing development or did I want to, become more of a security generalist? And I took the latter path. And since then I've been working for, large and small companies, sometimes doing consulting. Gunnar and I have encountered each other in the field in the actual wild doing doing security work on at least one occasion.
Gunnar sighting in the wild.
There you go. And so now I work for a tax software company where I'm responsible for systems and software security. So making sure that our products are hardened against intruders, making sure that that the infrastructure that we use upon which that infrastructure resides, that those applications reside, I should say, are hardened, and I'm loving every minute of it.
Well, that's great. Thank you for the career trajectory, because I think that really informs a lot of what I see out of your work, and we'll put a link to your book, your new book. I'm glad that 2 English majors have been able to go back and actually publish a book. That's very exciting. And we're on to the second edition of your cybersecurity architecture book. We'll put a link in the show notes. I think you've already hit on some of the themes of one question I had for you, which is, it seems to me like sometimes security architecture is a place where organizations look to promote technical people who would like to remain subject matter experts with no management responsibility. And I think that obviously there's a place for that in a lot of organizations, but there's probably more to the role than just staying technical and not managing people. And the fact is, when you gave your intros of your career journeys, you covered a lot of different grounds in a lot of different spaces. To start in low-level networking and end up in AI and ML is quite a trajectory. And it strikes me that architecture is about threat modeling. It's about risk assessment. It's about communicating those risk assessments. It's about providing leadership to the organization. Can you talk about the skills that each of you see that make an individual a strong security architect? And let's leave the technology side out of it for now, because I'm going to assume that that is table stakes for anybody to get there, at least in part, but not exactly what makes somebody a great architect. So whoever wants to take the first
I
run at that
love
one.
that you said, let's assume that like the deep technology part of it is table stakes, because, you know, I completely agree. That's where you don't even start. If you don't understand the technology, you don't know how it works, then go learn that. And then there are the other skills, as you spoke about, that you need to add on for architecture. I think also there's two sort of core tracks in architecture. There's network and systems architecture nowadays. I mean, back in the day, for me, it was actually running the cables and setting up the routers myself, you know, putting them in the rack and setting them up. Nowadays, it's all about IaaS and managing your cloud instances and your VPCs. But still, you know, there's that sort of the network, how the systems talk to each other, what your segmentation is, and then there's the application. So since I started out more network, I'll go there and Ed, I'll let you talk about that application. But with the network architecture, think about it. These are actual business decisions that you have to make right now. Which cloud is going to be one of the conversations that you start with? Are we going to do, is it a cloud-based architecture? Do we want to have it private or not? What kind of security? There's all the big clouds have, you know, great security tools that are wrapped in. What kind of security tools do you want to turn on? What kinds of control do you want to give the engineering team or other parts of the organization to be able to impact your deployment, right? And if you want your engineering team to start terraforming whole new parts of the network for you, or do you want to control it? These are all conversations that really are about the business, how the business works, how and the engineering team is going to work, how the business wants to work, what clouds you want to be in, how you link in the information and the data from those different clouds. This all matters about the company, what they want to do, but then also what they want to pay and whether or not they're going to see your vision as their vision, because architecture is one thing, but security architecture is taking the get it done and just get it out there and make sure it works. And that next level of, is it protected? And when you start adding the security, building the security into it, you can add some complexity and some cost. So that, again, is something that you have to have these conversations. And I'm a huge fan of this. Is security isn't something that's done to you, including in architecture. Security is something that the entire team embraces and wants to go forward with. So you have to be really strong at being able to communicate the benefits of what it is you're proposing, why you want to add more security or change the architecture, but also being very much able to listen and be empathic to what the teams that are going to be using that architecture need it to do for them.
Yeah, and I think the empathy part of it is really important. I think that's one of the things I've observed that separates the good architects from the great ones, is the ones that understand where those things go next. Ed, what would you add to that list?
I think empathy nails it. I think the answer is empathy, right? And I'll tell you why I think that's the case. One of the things that we really wanted to do in the book was, yes, give people our perspective, right? We wanted to do that, right? But we also wanted to capture the perspective of other people who have been doing this for a long time, such as yourself.
Like Gunnar. Thank you.
Like Gunnar. And incorporate that feedback, like incorporate those lessons into the book as well. So we went out and interviewed a bunch of people, and you know, among the people that we talked to, a lot of architects, big companies, small companies, people who've written, you know, frameworks. You know, so for example, you know, we talked to, you know, people like John Sherwood, right? So the SABSA model is the Sherwood, you know, applied security, you know, applied business security model, our architecture model, right? So the S in SABSA, we went and talked to him, right? And we talked to people like Andy Clark and, you know, Andrew Townley, and just really well-known names in the architecture space. And all of them said pretty much one thing, which is number one, empathy. So it's not just us saying that, it's like the universal consensus is that it's empathy. The thing that I also think is interesting, that I think is kind of underwrites a lot of the skills that are useful and valuable, goes all the way back, and you know, people are maybe find this a little nerdy, but Vitruvius, right? So Vitruvius, like Vitruvian Man, right? The Leonardo da Vinci guy that has his arms out, right? So he was actually a famous Roman architect. And he wrote a book called De Architectura, right? Which is basically the principles of architecture for building a structure. And in my mind, I think a lot of the skills that the fundamental principles of architecture that were outlined more than 2,000 years ago, I think are really applicable directly today in the architecture models for application security, for applications and infrastructure, right? And so he talks about things like, I forget what they are in the Latin, but basically like strength, durability, fitness of purpose, right? These things that, like, if you, somebody said it best. I don't remember who said this, but one of the people we interviewed said, you are going to have an architecture, right? There will be an architecture regardless of what you do. The question is it a disorganized slipshod one that happens to organically evolve, or is it something that's planned, that's systematic, that is fit for purpose? So I think that ability to think about it that way, to apply the lessons of things like durability, fitness, purpose, etc., to what you're doing in your work, and have enough discipline to be able to do it well, and enough rigor to forward the process, but not so much rigor that you're bogged down in details. I think that's where the balance is. So being able to balance the amount of process to realize the result.
It's an amazing combination of both your answers. I think it really distills decades of architecture, security architecture wisdom into such a short list that is maybe easy to summarize, but I think it takes practitioners years to learn the types of things that you just summarized. And I think you're doing a real service for people by putting this in writing and making it accessible to a wider audience. Vitruvius isn't going to build the aqueduct or the bridge by himself, right? He has to be able to communicate those ideas to a much wider group of builders. We have that exact same problem today. Somebody knows the infrastructure side. Not everybody can go across the entire stack, right? Some people just know the database side. Some people just know the networking side. So as you think about taking what's already a pretty difficult mix of skills and putting a team together, how do you see a security architecture team work as a cohesive practice? Does it make sense to organize it by a business domain? Like, this is the architecture team for the loan department at a bank, or does it make sense to organize by a technical domain or other? Like, how do you think about bringing these together as a team?
It's interesting because I'm actually curious in your answer, because you were the chief security architect for the largest bank in the country. Like, so I'm really, of that answer, I really could. Would you mind telling us your, because I'm interested.
I don't know that I have the answer for all times, because I think it's hard to get a one size fits all. But I do think that starting with the end in mind is helpful. So are we trying to roll out a new payment stack, and we have an end goal in mind, and then building an architecture team around that? Or are we trying to answer the mail on business as usual security architecture? Is this ready to go into production type of questions, in which case it could be much more cookie cutter of network identity, cryptography, and those kinds of things, where each subject matter expert comes to the table with their own design. So I think starting in what is the end deliverable that this architecture team is on the hook effectively to deliver is a good way to think about where you might end up. But the right answer for organization A and B would probably be different in my view.
I agree with that. And size of the organization is going to be very, very different. Like a really large bank is going to have to look at things very differently from a 40-person startup, for example. So I think you're right. And I think also that there's the corporate network, like just how are we getting email to each other? Because that has to be cohesive, and that has a very specific purpose. But then, especially at large companies, or when you start getting subs, you have all these different areas where they're going to have unique nuances to their architecture. They're going to be very specific to the use case or the business need.
And I think that's where the architects come in, right? They are the ones who maps the use case onto the non-functional requirements. We can we can certainly keep this going for a long time between the three of us on security architecture. And I do want to have a discussion at your soonest convenience on AI and ML on a future podcast, if you're willing. But for today, unfortunately, we only have time for one last question for you. And that is, what is the business value that a security organization and other executive management can hope to get out of a security architecture team? It's budget season all across the world. Is budget season for 2024. If I'm a security manager or managing a security architecture team, putting up a budget for my security architecture team, what am I telling the business? What am I telling the people who are giving me that funding envelope of what are they going to get out of security architecture teams from a business value standpoint?
Yeah.
That is such a good question. I mean, that is awesome. I actually, Diana, do you mind if I take a swing at this one?
Yeah, you go. Yeah.
So yeah, I love this. I love this question, right? Because the most important thing, at least in my opinion, like what's funny to me, I know I keep going back to physical buildings, right? But in my opinion, it's a really good analogy because I think that's why we call it architecture, right? Because of the analogy to physical buildings. And nobody would say, we're going to build a skyscraper and we're going to hope it works. We're going to start
put one foot in front of the other.
Exactly, right? We're
just start nailing things together.
Yeah.
Pick up the rocks, put them down.
Nobody would do that, right? But we do this all the time in business, right? And I think the only way that you can make sure that your outcomes are intended, that your resources are used in the proper way. I mean, there are huge. I mean, I worked for ISACA, right? I left that on my initial intro, but I worked for ISACA for a long time, right? I was responsible for frameworks like COBIT, right? And I will tell you if you could distill COBIT down to one thing, it is make sure that your resources are being used in the optimal way to fulfill business objectives. Full stop, right? That's the whole point of any kind of governance framework. And when you look at how we build stuff, we just ignore this lesson, right? And in my mind, like, what should the business expect? They should expect that at the end of the process, they're going to get a thing that does what they want it to do, and they're going to use the resources of building that thing in the most optimal way for the stakeholders involved to get the outcome that they want. That is my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's about optimization, because a lot of what we have to do for security is we're going to optimize. I mean, at one of the companies I worked for, parts of the cloud would get hot because companies hadn't secured their instances, and so they had crypto miners on there, and so they were running hot. Well, that's compute that those customers had to pay for. And so security, as we're looking at utilization, as we're looking at access, because it has a security component, it has an optimization component, and it also has a resilience and a reliance component for the company. So really, if you secure it, you're going to have the best outcome for the business.
Awesome. Well, I couldn't think of a better way to end it, especially as we're in budget season here. Just one last time for everybody on the podcast. It is Practical Cybersecurity Architecture. It is out in October. Do I have that right? The second edition is out in October.
Yes.
Available Amazon and all sorts of book retailers, I'm sure. Thank you so much for joining today, Diana Kelley and Ed Moyle. I really appreciate your time, and I hope we have you back sometime very soon.
Thank you, Gunnar.